Okay, we're continuing with the quote book, Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're going in alphabetical order. We're on the letter B. So next person to talk about is Boethius. Okay, he wrote a very famous book called The Consolations of Philosophy. And he was sort of one of the last great scholars, fading out from the Roman Empire. He lived from 475 to 525 A.D. He later became a saint, Saint Severinus Boethius, and he's also been called the last great Roman. After the death of St. Augustine in 426 AD, it was Boethius who helped to restore appreciation for Aristotle. Boethius felt that classical philosophy and Christianity went together to make the classically educated Christian man better, more sophisticated than a barbarian. The influence of the Greeks was very big on Christianity. And I see a similarity, you can obviously see it here, between Boethius and between St. Thomas Aquinas. The idea of they felt it was necessary to have sort of that Greek background and foundation as sort of part of the base of Christian education. And so anyways, and also he was the Aristotelian side of Christianity. There's two major strains of Christianity. The first one comes out of Plato, going into St. Augustine, going into Luther and the Protestant Reformation, then Calvin and Puritanism. And so Protestantism tends to be more just by the Bible, tends to be more dogmatic, authoritative. But the weakness of Protestantism is it tends to turn over its authority to the secular ruler, and then it just fades into the garbage can, okay? Because the secular ruler cares about secular things. They don't care about religion, so they destroy the religion. That's the problem with Protestant strain of Christianity, okay? Catholic strain of Christianity used to be pretty good, but I think what messed it up was, insisting that the priest not be married, all right? Once the priests aren't allowed to be married, then you get a different type of man wanting to be a priest, and that leads to a weakness in the church. But anyways, be that as it may, Arthur Herman. Arthur Herman is the guy who wrote the great book called The Cave in the Light. That's the best philosophy book ever written. He said that Boethius is the man who reintroduced Aristotle to the West. Okay, and of course, Aquinas is the one who showed that faith and reason go together, and that Aristotle should be, sort of the foundation of Christians' education starting out, along with the Bible, of course, yeah, but Aristotle was very good. And, Ayn Rand had said, wherever Aristotle goes, everything always gets better. And that's true. Okay, Boethius was a Roman Christian. He wrote the book Consolations of Philosophy. He knew Greek and Latin, so he could read the ancient Greeks in Greek. Boethius wrote that the four great scholars of ancient Greece and Rome were Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero. Cicero wrote a ton of stuff, too, that stuck around. Cicero's great, and the books by Robert Harris on Cicero are fantastic. They're extraordinary. Okay, Boethius emphasized that reading Aristotle helps a person to understand reality and to be able to cope with it. This was a break from the Augustinian point of view that one only needs to read the Bible. Okay, and I always also say, give me a little bit of a break. Okay, the Catholic Church was around for hundreds of years before the Bible was around. Augustine was more influenced by Plato. We talked about that. I talked about the two strains of Christianity. Okay, here's just one quote from Boethius. God is found in goodness. And Boethius would also say things like, nothing is either bad, but thinking makes it so. Kind of like the lead into the eventual line by Shakespeare. He translated as much Aristotle and Plato into Latin as he could, Boethius. Irish monks then made copies of the works of Boethius and other scholars, and they helped to keep all that classical education alive. That's why you got that book by Thomas Cahill, How the Irish Saved Civilization, which is a great book. A lot of Irish are real bookish. More of them are drinkers, but there's a lot of Irish scholars, bookish scholars. The Irish monks also copied Latin, Cicero, Virgil, Augustine, St. Jerome's Latin Vulgate Bible, so they really did a lot to keep alive the education of Christianity that came out of the Roman Empire. Okay, next person we're going to do quotes on is Blake Bowles. Blake Bowles, he's the author of a book called The Art of Self-Directed Learning, or College Without High School, a teenager's guide to skipping high school and going to college. He was an astrophysicist who became interested in self-directed education. He ran this program called Unschooling Adventures. Here's some quotes by Blake Bowles. An education is the capacity to author your own life instead of merely accepting the one handed you. Now here's the one I really liked, and this one would echo in my mind a lot. He said, big excitement comes from big challenges. Being reasonable is self-sabotage because setting a low challenge goal will shrink the energy quota that you apply to the goal. And I look back on my life and I think he's 100% right. I screwed up at times. Like when I was in college, I sort of like, well, it would just be good this year if I could, go to nationals, or if I could, win 30 matches or something. And I should have been saying to myself, I should try, to be an All-American, or, because if you set your goals high and you focus all your energy on them, you achieve more, It's like why when you take a class, you should try to get an A+. It doesn't mean you're going to get an A+, but if you're aiming for an A+, you'll probably get an A. So anyways, that echoed in my mind because I feel like I screwed up. My wrestling, I did good, but I should have been better. I should have been All-American. I was just like a victory away from being an All-American, which I regret. Okay, Blake Bowles, next quote. Production is more exciting than consumption. Writing is more exciting than reading. Producing is more exciting than consuming. Okay, next person we're going to talk about is Dietrich Bonhoefer. He's a famous Lutheran minister. And there's some interesting things about him. He says, your life as a Christian should make non-believers question their disbelief in God. And there's truth in that. For example, I saw how my mother was, and I'm like, wow. She had energy just coming off the charts. It was so nice and so much fun. And, I have these old Puerto Rican aunts. They're all Pepita. Okay. They're so nice. They're so religious, too, man. It's not even funny. And it made them better, and it made them happy. It wasn't anything anybody forced on them. They loved it. Okay, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Your life as a Christian should make non-believers question their disbelief in God. Okay, you shall know them by their loves, another quote about Christians. Eric Metaxas. True faith is not a leap into the dark. It is a leap into the light. Yeah, and one of the things, too, if you want to be a creative artist, it's like, holy crap, the Christians are by far the best creative artists that the world has ever seen. So if you want to be great at creating art, you got a wise thing to do is look at people who've been great at it and see what you can learn from them. Look at the quotes of the great artists. Bach, every composition I make is to the greater glory of God. Michelangelo, I put all my hope in God and do everything for him. Okay. There it is. And the other ones are like that as well. Many of the very best ones. Bonhoeffer, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. If you board the wrong train, it is no use running along the corridor in the other direction. To recognize the significant in the factual, that is wisdom. Faith without works is not faith at all, but a simple lack of obedience to God. Now that's a very big statement because he was a Lutheran minister. So Martin Luther basically said it's faith alone. And sola fide, okay? Sola gratia, sola biblia. So Martin Luther basically said the book of James was bogus. So what I'm basically saying here is Martin Luther said all you need is faith, and it's up to God whether or not God's grace, whether or not to save you. And what Bonhoeffer is contradicting that. He's agreeing with the book of James, saying, oh, no, you also have to do good works. And I would agree with that. I mean, your faith is good, but your belief should guide your behavior. Okay, Bonhoeffer continues. It is the nature and the advantage of strong people that they can bring out the crucial questions and form a clear opinion about them. But the weak always have to decide between alternatives that are not their own. Okay, Bonhoeffer continues. Jesus is only there for others. God in human form, not in the Greek divine human form of man in himself, but in the form of man for others, and therefore he was crucified. Okay, so a little bit of a distinction between Greek philosophy and Christian philosophy. Christian philosophy is more thinks more about helping others than Greek, but there's a lot of knowledge to come from the Greeks. Okay, here we go. Now we're doing Daniel Boorstin. Okay, Daniel Boorstin lived from 1914 to 2004. He was a historian. He wrote a book about creativity. So here's one quote. The courage to imagine the otherwise is our greatest resource, adding color and suspense to all our life. Education is learning what you didn't even know you didn't know. Okay, next is Niels Bohr. He lived from 1885 to 1962. He's a physicist, and he said, an expert is someone who has already made all the mistakes in a narrow field. Yeah, that's part of being an expert is you have to experiment and try everything in your field, and that means you're going to have all the screw-ups. But those are the best lectures a lot of times is when some old, sophisticated, person tells you about all the mistakes they made so you can avoid them. And that's what I've noticed is when young people speak, they're trying to get promoted, so they always want to be by the book, and they don't say anything that's not proper. Whereas when you get the best of the old guys talking, they'll tell you, oh, this is how I screwed up, and this is where we messed up, we misdiagnosed this, we had a complication. And that's really valuable information. Niels Bohr quote, he says, "We have all agreed that your theory is crazy. The question that divides us is whether it is crazy enough to be correct." Okay? The fact that religions through the ages have spoken in images and parables and paradoxes means simply that there are no other ways of grasping the reality to which they refer. But that does not mean that it is not a genuine reality. Okay, so that's it for today and the letter B.